And my actual eyesight is there the high drive, deep center, go, 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 we're out of here, say ya, playa.
Just like they drew it up in Hollywood, Caladros, the 3-2, swing and a miss, and the Audubon Green Wave have upset the Kingsway Dragons, and this is it for good. The Audubon Green Wave are back in the Final Four. A dog pile on their side.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to DW Broadcasting's coverage of men's varsity
From our entire crew, we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one, folks.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to episode 14 of the Dan Wilkins Show. It sounds weird to be saying episode 14 here in 2024, but for those of you that aren't aware, this show has undergone several iterations throughout the years. We first started out as a solely interview show back in 2020, back when everybody was locked in their homes, and making banana bread. But times have changed, and we kind of stopped doing this show in the spring of 2021 because I had started to go back to school. I was a freshman in high school at the time, and interest had kind of waned in it because the big thing about 2020 was that people were willing to do anything if it meant passing the time. And we had some pretty big names in our first 12 episodes. John Stiglmeyer, the head coach of South Dakota State football, Division I FCS. I mean, hey, for a freshman in high school, I can't believe I did that. And then that same year, he went on to be runner-up in the FCS National Championship. We had Val Whiting, one of the best women's basketball players in Stanford history. Derek Barnett, not Derek Barnett, I'm sorry. One of the fellas who worked for the Texas Rangers in the 2010s and the Spurs in the 90s. Either way, I could go on and on. We had a lot of really interesting guests from all corners of the U.S. and all corners of sports media and sports in general. We had players, coaches, media personnel, journalists. We had a little bit of everything, and then we tried to bring it back, didn't go too well, just didn't have the same reception. So I thought a couple months ago, why not bring it back with a South Jersey focus? And Tad, you might be able to agree with me. There's not a lot of South Jersey exclusive content going on right now in the form of radio shows or podcasts or talk shows. I mean, there is some here and there, but I feel like I'm bringing a different format to the table, which is part of the reason why we're doing this today. We are here with Tad Kozeniewski, the head coach of Sterling Baseball, and somewhat more importantly, the head TV director of Sterling Channel 19. He's been in the position since 2005 and has over 35 years of experience in radio and TV, starting from disc jockeys in the 80s to working for different cable companies in the 90s and 2000s. And as of 2022, just wrapped up his third season as a head coach of the Sterling Silver Knights for their baseball program, proudly representing the blue and silver tonight. But Tad, it was a little it was a little bittersweet for me to reach out because we have talked a lot over the years, just because we are both fellow broadcasters, one who's been working for 35 years and one who has been working for 3. So there's a big difference between us, but when I decided probably around July or August that I wanted to reboot the Dan Wilkins Show, with a focus on the South Jersey talent and South Jersey, history. You were the first person that I thought of. I thought of reaching out to a couple other people, but I'm like, if there's somebody that I can talk to that I know will make a good show, especially for a good comeback show, I know Tad's going to be the guy. So, Tad, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
And Tad, there's been there is a lot to talk about. So I will cut to the chase. Glassboro State grad, class of 1990. But I will say the Rowan that we know today is a lot different than what Glassboro State was in the 90s and in the late 80s as well. And one thing that I thought about, the first thing that I thought about when I was, kind of doing my research into you and starting to gather questions is, getting into the sports broadcasting industry, because I had to follow a very different path than you had to. And considering your first couple of jobs were with Rowan Radio, which is still around, WGLS, great station. I listen to it a lot, especially because now that I'm down here in Pittman, maybe 1,500 feet from the Rowan campus, I see it a lot. And Jones, who does a great job with Princeton basketball, also the station manager there, he's done an excellent job. But um, times have changed basically, and the sports cam program or sports communications program at Rowan didn't start until about 6 or 7 years ago. So, what was that process like? And I should also preface that by asking, how did you gain your first interest in sports broadcasting?
All right. I'm a grad of Paul Six, class of '84. I was lucky enough to be a pretty good baseball player. My dad was the head coach at Eastern High School. Mr. Hartman was the longtime coach. My dad was his assistant, and then he took over. And throughout my childhood, I was a baseball and basketball player. Ended up going to Paul Six. I graduated Paul Six in '84, thinking I'm going to be a baseball player. So in baseball in college, you have fall, I don't know, fall seasons, fall workouts. So I showed up in the fall, loving baseball, and not that I didn't love it when I showed up at Glass, but when I got there, I saw so many guys, and I was like, you know what, this just, my heart wasn't quite in it. I said, you know what, I'm going to try and do something else. So after a couple weeks, a week or so of practice, I said, I'm done with baseball. Told my parents. And I just was walking down the campus one day and I saw this thing that said WGLS. And I'm like, wow, radio. I want to be a DJ. I don't know where it came from. I think my dad listened to all the music of the 50s and the 60s, the Geeter and all those guys. And that was just so interesting to me. And growing up in Philadelphia, they had a radio station, a couple of big radio stations. One was now known as, I think it's 98 WOGL. It was a hot hit station, and the DJs were just amazing. They talked after every song. It was high energy. And I said, I want to do that. Walked into college radio station, WGLS, not even with sports on my mind. I said, I want to be a DJ. So I went in, loved rock music, ended up becoming a DJ. While I was there, I found out, wow, you guys broadcast the games? All right. Why don't I take a shot at this? I'm a former player. I know the game. My dad was a coach. So I started in I guess it was the fall of '85, announcing the football games strictly on the radio. There was no TV. I had no experience. You, at least in high school, you had your experience of learning with Audubon and all the teams. I'd never done it before, didn't know what the heck I was doing. So what I ended up doing is I would go and announce a game and I'd record it. And then I'd go home and listen to it, learn from my bad habits, write some things down, and just started in college there. Was a DJ, loved doing that. Uh, then I got to the point where getting near the end of senior year, they asked me to run the station. So I made it a classic rock station. I was the head guy in charge. I also announced games on the radio. As I'm getting ready to graduate, I had some cable TV companies contact me. Now, back then, now this is where we talked about before we went on the air, Dan, that there's some more opportunities, yet there's some less opportunities. So in my day, we didn't have podcasts, but we had a cable company in Washington Township called Jones Intercable. You had one in the Woodbury area. I believe at that time it was called Store. You had TKR Cable in Gloucester City and Maple Shade. You had NYT Cable in Cherry Hill. You had Burlington County, and you had cable down the shore. So I started first in Washington Township with Jones Intercable. What was cool about them is not only did they announce games, which I got paid to come out and announce high school games, they also had local news at 7 o'clock. So I became the fill-in sports guy. When Ed Bankin, who now works for ESPN Radio nationally, couldn't make it, I would fill in and do the 5-minute sports of what was going on throughout the Washington Township, Williamstown area. And that's two different things from play by play, but I got experience with that. But now I'm announcing cable. Now other organizations here, oh, wow, you do cable. Can you do some games for us in Woodbury? Can you do games for us in Cherry Hill? So I got to the point that I was being paid to announce high school games, sometimes 4 and 5 days a week. It was guaranteed during football season. I'd have a Friday night game somewhere. Sometimes I'd have a Saturday morning and then a Saturday afternoon game. So that's how I got started. Just walking into it, no experience. This looks like fun. Wanted to be a DJ. That's kind of where hand it back to you. At that point, I was mainly doing cable TV sports, and I did become a professional DJ on the radio in Wildwood.
So I guess, I mean, a big thing that I kind of got tripped up on there during your story was the fact you were talking about being the station manager, that you were the guy in charge while you were what you said 1986 or something like that. So
I was there 85 to 90, 88 and 89 is where I became the program director
wow,
there.
so you weren't even like, because what I think of when I think of somebody like who would be like the head student in charge would be like a senior on his way out, already got one foot out the door, but you were still technically an underclassman and you were in charge of everything. I mean, that's something that as a college student myself, I mean, if I had that kind of opportunity, I'd be cloud nine for the rest of my college days. I mean, being able to manage that, and obviously Glassboro State at the time, now Rowan, not as big of a campus as it is today. I mean, it's incredible to see how far Rowan has grown. I think there was something that came up about them being like one of the fastest growing colleges in the nation or something, but it's just incredible to see how much it's progressed in the past 30 years.
Well, I'll give you two little things while we're here. First, the town of Glassboro itself, like where you go now, there's a bookstore, there's a center of town. That was Glassboro House. There were houses there. People were living there. So in
Hmm.
my day, the campus ended at it's like the big cement thing as you walk that way that says Rowan University. That's where our campus that I knew it ended. The
Right.
new, let's call them condominiums on the baseball side, that was all woods. That was never there. So it was more of a grassroots kind of thing. The neat thing about it for me that gave me pride with the radio station, I actually applied to get into the communications department at Glassboro State as a freshman. I was denied because of my SAT score. My grades were okay. I wasn't that I was dumb or a bad, bad student. I did my work, but my SATs were low, and I was told you can't. We're not going to accept you as a communication student. So my degree is in health and physical education. So I have that, and my minor. Eventually, through working at GLS, it was stunning to the people there. How does a health and physical education major run the station? But everybody asked me, we'd like you to do it. I had no thoughts of doing it till I had about 6 or 7 people saying, you're the guy to run the station. So that's how that came apart. And then the battle back then, if you think about music back in the day, there was what's either called heavy metal or hair bands. So I liked that music. Like Metallica was an unknown group back in the mid 80s. They were just starting. And as you got to 87, 88, we were the only station in the area playing Metallica. YSP in Philly wasn't playing it, MMR wasn't playing it because it was too hard for them. So we got all kinds of listeners, all from northern Delaware, southern New Jersey, that would call in. And we were a hard rock, heavy metal station. So all those bands that you might call hair bands or heavy metal, we played all of them. And you could walk through the campus. That one of my favorite moments was the time I was not on the air and I had to walk from like the student center or the library where our station was. We had no windows. We were down in the basement. And I walked in the student center and the station was on. And it was a beautiful spring day. And I walked out by Edgewood on the edge of campus. Our station was blaring everywhere. All you heard was our station playing the music of today, hard rock, heavy metal. Van Halen, groups like that were lighter, but we played them. And it was neat to go out and go, wow, people were listening. And they would call, we'd get requests all the time. So that was my first personal foray in high school. Again, more into the radio DJ side of things. That's why my early jobs were more radio, but I also did the sports too. So very interesting time in that, again, we were highly respected in the fact that we got a busload of people to go see Kiss and Metallica because the stations in Philly weren't playing them at that time. So those people that represented those record companies were like, well, at least you're promoting and playing our music. We'll let you come over. And we go backstage. I got to meet Metallica. I got to meet the guys from Kiss. And here I am, I'm where you are right now. And it was just, that's where the times have changed in that we ran it. It's that station right now is a fantastic station. It's won become like station of the year 3 or 4 times now. But the music is programmed where we picked the music back then. We played what we wanted when we wanted. So that's one of the biggest differences when you talk about college radio and local at that time.
And I feel like one of the things that, I was going to mention was, if you're talking about late 80s Metallica, that's after Master of Puppets, that's after Ride the Lightning. So,
Yeah.
you know, I guess they really didn't go. I mean, I would say that they're still mainstream. They're mainstream enough to be played on a
They
station
are
like
now. They are
WGLS. Yeah.
now.
I guess before the Black Album, like they just didn't have that same pull. And I also think that it's the same thing in the late 90s. People were like talking about like hip hop, East Coast, West Coast. They were saying it was dangerous, or it was bad for the community. People were saying that about heavy metal too. They were like, what is this? What is this?
Well,
Why are we
well,
playing it on radio stations?
the group Judas Priest, had to go into court. They were being sued. A kid sued himself, and he killed himself, and he had the lyrics to a Judas Priest song. Uh, I believe his Twisted Sister went in to represent too. So people were like saying lyrics and song equals kids doing stuff. And eventually, after time, it got thrown out of court. It's music, just like music of today. It's
Exactly.
just at that time where rap and the type of music you hear today is dominant. In the mid to late 80s, Def Leppard, all these bands doing the stadium tours and all that, and your heavy rock bands, that was predominantly what you heard on the radio. And that's what we kids were into, and that's what we played and got into.
And I also think that playing the because you would think of like late 80s with heavy metal and hair bands having like the college kid experience, because you don't really see somebody who's of quote the greatest generation or the silent generation listening to something like Metallica or listening to something like AC/DC or Kiss. So it's something that the younger people listen to. Exactly why, at all college stations, I listen to it's funny, I listen to 90.1 a lot, the Temple station, and they have classical from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., and then they have jazz, like smooth jazz, and then some Latin in there from 6 p.m. to midnight. So, like, it's a college station, but it doesn't really play the music that college students would listen to. And yet you have things like Rowan Radio where they're directly appealing to the younger audiences.
And what was interesting at that time, around when I started there, alternative music was huge in college. There was
Hmm.
there was alternative people, and there were hard rock and heavy metal people, and that's why the people that wanted hard rock and heavy metal came to me. So there was a battle at our station to see what the format was going to be. Many people wanted it to be alternative, The Cure, bands like that. A lot. It wasn't stuff that I personally like, but that was just as big back then. In my opinion, heavy metal was bigger, but there was a big faction of the alternative bands of that time, and there was about so you. In general, if you were walking through the school, you either listened to hard rock, heavy metal, or you listened to the alternative music. Now, some of the alternative music then started, some of it got to the mainstream, but that was the battle of the 80s. The other thing I liked about 80s music, I can play it in my classroom. If you're in my classroom, I play the 80s music because I don't have to worry about the lyrics. It wasn't blatant in your face. So
Hmm.
I might not play, in certain cases, I might play certain Metallica songs, but in general, it's just pop music from the 80s because I know I can play it if you're in my class. I don't have to worry about the lyrics. So there were a lot of things. It wasn't all just heavy metal. That was one of the strongest. And then again, alternative there, just as evenly listened to.
Yeah, that's a great point to mention that alternative music like The Cure and everybody like that. I listen to The Cure a lot. I wouldn't put them in like a top 10 list or anything like that, but um the factions of music have changed so much over time. Where heavy metal has really not been mainstream for a while. It's mostly pop music. It's been watered down and everything like that. But I'm going to shift gears a little bit here because we have been talking about Rowan Radio, and it's a great station. But I'm sure, I mean, I have my own Instagram page that's a side project about music called New Guy Old Soul. So that is a story for another day if I wanted to start a music podcast. But um, you know. The 80s is where you got your start, but the 90s is where you got a lot of your prolonged experience, especially with the Tri State Media Network. And Not only that, but also WOCC, Suburban Cable, Garden State Cable, now Comcast, and you also got your start with the Sports Video Network. I just got to ask, I mean, how did you manage your time? I guess I mean, I have to ask, was it like a freelancer job where you were like just on assignment on certain days or okay, that's basically what it was. Because that's what I see. You know, you were kind enough to email me your resume so I could do a little bit of extra research going into this episode. And then I see 1990, 1990, 1990, and I'm thinking, man, he's working like five jobs. And then I realized, well, I work for Dan Wilkins Broadcasting, but I also work for, I worked for my high school at the time. I work for RCSJ and the Roadrunner Network, and I work for HSG Network up in Old Bridge. So I'm doing those simultaneously, but they're all a result of just freelancing. So talk to me about, those specific jobs and how you managed that in the 90s with that. But also a more specific question. Broadcast production has changed a lot in the past 30 years, going more from analog technology to the digital world that we have today. Talk to me what it was like to produce a broadcast in the 1990s.
All right. So you were talking again early on with things. I'll go to that question, I guess, first. When I was announcing, producing, and directing in the 90s, it was all cabling. Run a cable to this camera, run a cable to that camera. When we did the Tri-State Media Network, I was involved with the Atlantic City Surf, and we did Friday night baseball. They would rotate around three states, and usually every third Friday, I would either be the play-by-play announcer or I could be the producer and director of the game. So we'd alternate. And if people think of South Jersey, think of River Shark Stadium. We would park our truck somewhere down the right field line, or maybe in River Shark's case, the left field line, and we'd have to run cabling around the stadium to first base, up the top to first base, run a center field camera. You'd have to run all, and then hit the announcer's area, put you behind home plate if you're announcing. We'd have to run all that equipment where it was literally all cables. What's a little bit different now, again, where I'm at Sterling High School, and obviously the big time as well, it's all digital based, Ethernet. Sometimes you can do Wi-Fi. There's more tricks that you can do. Now, what makes it more difficult for me, being 58 now, is in the analog world, when I'm in a TV truck, if something breaks, I pretty much knew what it was and could either get to it or replace it. In the digital world, for as easy as it is for even a guy like you to get things started, if something goes down, I really rely on the computer. And my computer knowledge is limited. I'm very lucky at Sterling. I have a gentleman named Paul Mays. He's our technical person for the whole school, for the teachers, for everything. But he's a great assist for me in what I do. So I guess part of the difference is if you were with me 30 years ago and we were setting up for a high school game, we might arrive for a night football game around 12 o'clock. And we would check with the athletic directors, where can we go, where can't we go, run the cabling all over creation. Then you do your test, get it set up, do a dry run through with everything, maybe get a dinner, and then go through with the game. Today, it's nice that you have the advantage, other people advantage. You can take one camera. You can hook up to the Wi-Fi. You can hook up to a cell phone. There was no live back in my day. There was no live. It was cable TV, delayed broadcast. So if I was doing Washington Township or Williamstown football, we would tape the game at 7 o'clock and we'd try to play it back at 10. So if you were at the game, they'd run the tape, and it was a videotape. Somebody would get into a vehicle and run it back. When we started doing the Atlantic City Surf, we'd have to have a cable TV truck out with us. This part is what goes over my head. We'd hooked up into the system and we could do the surf and things like that live. The bigger regional events were live. The local cable stuff, that was all taped, and it was announced during the game. Hey, everybody, enjoy the game tonight. Go back home on TV and watch it. So I guess the biggest thing is the setup time might be a little bit shorter, a little bit different. You can get more creative now with these cameras. If I could run a cable with the camera, that was my limitations. Now you could do wireless. It's neat, the advantages that you have. And then like editing and recording, it was all done on tape. So now we can add, like when you're broadcast, you can easily have graphics on your broadcast. There were things of it. There was a whole Chiron machine that you had to do. And if that wasn't working, we lost all the graphics. And so you could go either way. I like the editing form of when we're editing in the digital world, but sometimes when we're going live, when I'm the producer or the director in my truck, I liked it better analog because I had a feel. Something goes wrong, I know what it is. Now something goes wrong, I got to pick up a phone and call my tech guy at school, hoping that he picks up, which 99% of the time he does, and we have to guess our way through it. But it gives you there's some of the pluses and minuses if that helps.
Yeah, and it's always interesting to think about. I tell people all the time when they ask me about broadcasting, I tell them, I'm incredibly lucky with how easy it is for me to do my job. Um, we said this before we got on air, is if I was born 20 years before that would have been 1985, I don't think I would be in the same position. At least it would have taken a lot longer.
Yes.
And it 100% would have. Now, I will say, um, we'll talk about the Atlantic City Surf in a little bit, but I think one of the biggest things that trips people up with broadcasting is a lot of the digital technology that goes along with it. There's so many different moving parts, and sometimes not even physical parts. The wireless cameras, the Wi-Fi that we now have, and one of the things that worked back in the 80s and 90s was with high school football, with being able to do those replays and play the game back at 10, which wouldn't really matter for anybody because unless you were there in person, nobody else would know how the game went. The newspapers, which have the final scores, don't come out until the next day. And if they're not a weekend publication, they're not going to come out until Monday the next week. So, we don't live in an age anymore where that works. Like, we have live
I'm gonna jump
reporters at the
let,
game.
let me jump in for a second. What was neat as an athlete in high school, I could play a game, baseball game. All right, I had a double. I knocked in a run. I had 4 hits. The excitement of that was we didn't have you there instantly to broadcast it to the world. So our excitement was getting the Courier Post or the Inquirer the next day and saying, "There I am. I got my name. Tad Kozeniewski had 2 hits, knocked in 2 runs, and I cut it out and I still saved it." It's neat that you can give the instant gratification. When you did one of my Sterling games, I could then watch parts of it on the bus just to see what's going on. How did it go? We didn't have that. So all we had was the next day, the Monday morning quarterback, looking at it on the paper. So that part of it, again, it's good and bad. It's neat. I love that you and people can go out there and do these games live. On a rare night that I'm home, it's neat. Watch other broadcasts. I might search broadcasts from other states and see what they're doing. So yeah, it's that is one neat big change that I think the players of today, they don't get the thrill. Dan Wilkins hit a home run. You could have the thrill the next morning. With you today, you have the thrill of watching it, which I would prefer between the two. But let's say if it's not being covered on TV or anything, you at least had the thrill of opening the paper up and everybody looked at it, and there it is. So that's one of the neat little dichotomy changes in the piece.
Yeah, and there's pros and cons to everything. With both eras that we're discussing here, the 90s and the present day. But it's nostalgic for these players, especially, I mean, look, there's still news publications covering high school sports, Courier Post, Press of Atlantic City. They do amazing jobs. South Jersey Times, Burlington County Times. I'm sure I'm forgetting a million of them, but a big thing that people like and the players like about my coverage is that they can clip those highlights and send them to their friends, or send them, more importantly, to recruiters and coaches and people who may be interested in furthering their careers respectively. And you don't really get that same experience out of a newspaper. Maybe if there's a Division 3 or Division 2 college baseball coach opening up the paper while he's sipping his black coffee, you know, he might see, oh, Kozeniewski drove in 2 runs and got 2 doubles. I'm going to have to go out to one of his games and see what he can do. And then on the other
And,
hand, you get the instant gratification of, oh, wow, that's how his swing mechanics work. I don't even have to go out there. I can follow up, but now I know the baseline of what I'm getting.
and part of what's changed with that, each paper had numerous sports reporters. There was at Friday night games, there's a pretty good chance if you were a respectable team, there'd be somebody there to counteract that. What they do now, which I think is awesome, you follow people on Twitter, and wherever these reporters are, they'll give you live video of an update. Hey, I know what game you're doing. You're doing a Kingsway or a Gloucester Catholic or an Audubon. And I want to, in my conference, I want to find out today, what is West Deptford doing? And I see, oh, this reporter is there and they're giving you they'll give you a highlight or something. So that's where the reporters have changed. They would just take some notes, give your opinion, but now they're as much doing video, trying to keep everyone interested in update as writers are. So interesting with that too.
Yeah, and I think we're also lucky where we are. There's a lot of reporters in North Jersey, a lot of reporters over in Philly and New York. I follow some other publications and they're affiliated reporters in like New England, like Vermont and New Hampshire, and they've got like one guy that's covering all of Vermont high school baseball. Not that Vermont high school baseball is going to turn a lot of heads, but it's for the same reason why we cover South Jersey football teams. Is everybody on that football team going to go to college to play football? No. Not everybody's going to even make it to the end of their high school careers, but it's for the sake of information. It's for the sake of informing the parents. It's for the sake of informing the fans, the alumnus, whatever you want to do with that information. We still cover high school sports journalism for a reason. Um, it hasn't gone by the wayside yet because of supply and demand, because I mean, maybe the supply has gone down, but the demand is certainly there. And especially with social media, it's changed a lot of things. And before I turn it over to you, I'll just say real quick, you know, I mean, we are just very lucky to be in the position where we are, like just geographically, because you don't have a lot of sports reporters covering baseball in other states. You might see it in Pennsylvania or in the Four Corners, whatever you want to say. But I think we're lucky with the crossroads between Philadelphia and New York. We're seeing a lot of people at a lot of different games, and it's a great thing.
And you get it, like, it's neat if you have a certain Saturday afternoon, check out a game. I check out what you're doing. There's people all over South Jersey. It's neat that you can get a live update. Something that I learned as my career went on, when I was announcing high school games, uh, when I first started doing it, I was used to hearing pro people announcing your Merrill Reese's, your national audiences, and I would tend to be more critical at some points on the kids and the referees. Then I started having conversations with people, and they started saying, well, you got to keep in mind, these are just high school kids. So I learned pretty quickly in my career, I announced differently. My high school games are different from the college games I did at Princeton and other universities. They're different from my minor league baseball games I've done. The higher you're up you go, the more critical that you can be. That's not necessarily my style. I think if you ask me what my style is as a play-by-play announcer, because I'm a coach, I'll give you one guess. Who am I sympathetic to when I'm announcing games if I'm a coach?
Players.
And
Yes.
coaches.
Yeah, coaches.
So So I'm sympathetic to both because I live that life. So when I'm going to be doing a football game myself soon, I'll be producing our Gateway game, but I'll be doing a Haddonfield game down at Pleasantville where I'll be announcing. I tend to not be critical of the coaches because I'm a coach. And even though I haven't coached football, I tend to be like, well, I think what they're trying to do is this. It may not have worked there, but this is where they're trying to do. Where at college, I'm a little bit different. If I see something, in my opinion, I don't jump on them, but I'm more likely to give my opinion. Boy, I'm really surprised. Like, you could go back to the Eagles game. If you and I were announcing the Eagles game, and on the third down play, they throw it to Saquon Barkley. I personally was at the game, and I liked that they did that. They rolled the dice. Barkley drops the ball. The clock stops. But in pro ball now, we can second guess that. If I'm doing a high school game, I might say, boy, I don't know. Maybe if you ask coach after the game, maybe he might want to run it there. But I won't get overly critical because, again, it's high school. So that was one of the biggest things I learned early on, was trying just, they're high school kids, backpedal a little bit. And that's probably as critical I get, is I say, wow, Dan, I bet if you talk to Dan Wilkins after the game, even though he dropped that ball, he'd probably tell you he should make that catch. Whereas on the pros, you might say, player X, he's a pro. That ball's in his hands. He's got to catch that ball. So that's an interesting dichotomy as your career goes on as well.
And I also think that that's a result of the fact that the professionals are professionals, and we have full talk show hosts and full talk shows, period. And you could argue with WIP and other radio stations that, like, there are full blown stations dedicated to sports talk, and a lot of it's critical. I listen to a lot of Eagles discussions and Sixers and Phillies discussions, and an overwhelming part of it is critical because the Eagles lost last week. They don't want to talk about the fact that Jalen Hurts did really good. They don't want to talk about the fact that Saquon Barkley looked good, but they want to talk about the fact that they lost, which, to be fair, that is what matters. It does matter whether you win or lose. I mean, let's not sugarcoat it here. But it's also important, what's in the little details. If Hurts really struggled in a win, that's also going to be talked about because that's a negative. And I've seen a lot, especially in modern sports media, is that negativity and staunch negativity will get a lot more impressions and will get a lot more people riled up and talking than just standard positive talk. Like people will talk about in the off season, these outrageous trade proposals or the outrageous draft boards that never actually mean anything and never actually have any substance. But because they have certain buzzwords, they rile people up. And I think that that's something that modern sports media with social media is something that really struggles, is that genuine opinions don't really hold the same weight if they don't have that shock value.
And when I'm doing play-by-play at games, I think sometimes Tom McCarthy gives a little bit too much of his opinion. John
Mhm.
Kruk is there to give his opinion. As a play-by-play announcer, I would say something. If I had John there, I said, John, you think the Phils might bunt here? Where Tom McCarthy goes out and says, oh, the Phillies should bunt here. My personal, what I like to do is I like to let the analysts do it in that situation, or I might ask them. I don't, in high school, I never go there. I just, hey, this could be a bunting situation if I'm announcing a baseball game. And if they bunt, great. And if they don't bunt, great. It's high school. If should we foul in a basketball game? I'd say they might want to think about fouling here, but if they don't, sometimes the coaches are trying to get them to foul, and the message isn't getting to the kids. So that's where I've matured as an announcer. And I can go do a high school game now, and I'm there for the enjoyment of the game, to promote what the kids are doing, to identify when a kid makes a play. And if a kid makes a dumb decision, we tend not to harp on that. We tend to, hey, I had an incident in my Sterling game the other day where we had, in a football game where I'm producing and directing, we had a skirmish that kind of went onto the track and almost went into the stands. We're covering it live, so we gave a wide shot. And then once it was done and they go to the middle of the field with the referees, if I'm doing this professionally and this is a college game or a pro game, we're replaying every camera. Let's look at this camera. I've got 6 cameras. Let's look at it. In a high school setting, we just did the one shot live and then we just stayed on the referees. So that's what I'm kind of getting to when it comes to difference what you and I do with high school, keeping it as positive as we can, and a pro or minor league event, it's covered differently, it's announced differently.
And I think that also something that people get mixed up a lot of times is people confuse being positive to being positive about everything. Because I mean, that's the thing that I think a lot of people trip up sometimes with sports commentary, because trust me, I've been through the same hoop of, you know, I was maybe a little too harsh on a player after making an error in a high school setting. And that is something that I had to learn kind of the hard way throughout the early parts of my career. And then the pendulum swings into being too overwhelmingly positive. And I think that there is, you may disagree with me on this, but there is a point where you can be too positive because there's just some things that you cannot sugarcoat. And one of my favorite guys to do color commentary with is one of your own, Jake Clark. He worked for me over the summer. He's a freshman at Rowan now. And one of the best things that we had conversations about, whether it was just driving on the way to the game or whatever, was talking about what it means to be a positive broadcaster, because you can make something good out of a bad situation, but that doesn't always mean that you have to. There's some cases where you should, but there's some times where if the ball goes right over his head and he doesn't see it and it's a cloudy day, Like there's just sometimes where you say, yeah, he should probably make that catch. But, that's all things considered. Look, these are high school kids. And like you said, the objective is to be positive and is to give these kids the film and the representation that they deserve. Nobody wants to be in a high school baseball game and then get berated for making an error, but there's just sometimes where something like that, maybe not to that scale, but something's got to happen.
One of my joys now being at Sterling High School, and my role mainly at Sterling High School is producing and teaching the kids how to produce it and announce. And you mentioned Jake. Um, Jake is one of many kids who came in, I guess, freshman or sophomore year, and I teach them. One of my pet peeves as an announcer and producer is I hate homerism. I can't stand it. I don't like it. I
I'm right there
indicate
with you.
so I tell my kids, look, like I have football, Gateway's coming. We're doing the game. It's live. There are Sterling people watching the game. There are Gateway people watching the game. You call it as you see it. If a Gateway kid makes a great play, get excited. Now, I do understand when I'm with Dan Wilkins, whenever, and Dan Wilkins is broadcasting both games, but Dan's an Audubon student for Audubon. I get it. You're going to be a little bit more excited if one of their players hits a home run, and I'm fine with that. I get a little disappointed with my guys, and they're better with it. So if somebody else hits a home run, give them a little bit of their due. I don't expect you to yell and scream, so and so from Sterling hit a home run, but give them a little bit. So I think I'm also one of the strange people in Philadelphia. When I watch the sports, I love when the game is on national TV
Hmm.
because I like that straight down the line. And I've been there. You're almost, as weird as it sounds, you're in that situation now. You're doing a football game with two different schools. I want the game to come down to the last play. I don't care who wins. When I'm producing a game for Sterling in the truck, yes, I would like to see Sterling win. I know the kids. But when you're announcing the game, I think it best serves the audience to give information on both teams, point out the good and the bad for both teams. I just am drawn professionally, and it's weird sometimes. Most people prefer to hear Tom McCarthy and Kruk with home games. If they happen to be on TBS or something and we can see the game, I'm watching TBS. I don't like the homerism, like when John Kruk goes, all right, we need a hit here. Come on, Phillies, we need a big hit. But that works in Philadelphia, and that's his job. That's a personal pet peeve of mine, and that's what I've taught my kids. And you have one of them, Jake, as a freshman. You see it and you call it as it is. If you're calling a Rowan game, it's okay to get a little more excited for Rowan, but put a little bit if somebody makes an amazing one-handed catch for the College of New Jersey, you should be getting pretty excited for that too. So I think that's one of your challenges as well as a young announcer. And I think you've done a good job. I've been very good with it, that you see both sides and wow, there are two sides listening to this. I'm not just in Philadelphia, just performing for Philadelphia people. Granted, that's different. You're considered more of a regional broadcast. I'm here to present everything. And that's what I liked about the challenges of cable TV. I'm doing Williamstown versus Washington Township. I just wanted to come down to the last play of the game. So I'm amazed when I hear how many people talk about Joe Buck. He hates the Eagles. He hates the Phillies. He doesn't. He just calls it as he sees it. And you don't hear Joe Buck going, come on, Phillies, let's get a hit here. That's just my personal pet peeve that I wanted to jump in on there.
Joe Buck has gotten so much better since he went to ESPN. I have really enjoyed listening to Joe Buck in the last couple of years because the running joke around the world was Joe Buck is a boring commentator and Joe Buck, doesn't know how to call a football game. And first of all, if he wasn't a good commentator, Fox obviously wouldn't put him on the World Series and all of the big, $1 million events for almost 20 years. But I did notice that when he went to ESPN, he got a lot more colorful. He got a lot more expressive. I don't know if you noticed that, but just something that I noticed was like after he left Fox, I mean, I'm not saying he was fully monotone, but he was pretty close to it. And he just kind of had something lash out when he went to ESPN for Monday Night Football, and he's gotten so much better. And I think that goes back to the point of, you can develop at any point in your career. You can get better at any time. You can improve at any time. But a big important thing that I'll mention is, what you were talking about earlier with homerism, is that really, in my opinion, circles back to moderation, and everything is good in moderation. I do like Tom McCarthy and John Kruk. I think they're a great crew. Do I not like the fact that they get a little out of hand and rowdy sometimes, and they're eating cheesesteaks in the third inning of a division clinching game? Yeah, I think that that's a little much, but look, in my time at Audubon, I did the math a couple weeks ago. I did 135 games for Audubon from my sophomore year to the time I graduated. They lost 48 of those games. Now they won 83 of them, which is good, but they lost 48 of those games. So, look, those are 48 times that I had to pack up the equipment and I said, Audubon lost. But at the same time, there were only a couple of those that really hurt, which was like those playoff losses in South Jersey Group 1 for baseball, or really just, those big games that get really chippy and get really intense, and then you lose at the end of the day. So, you can't win every game. And I like the fact, and I think that a lot of Audubon viewers also, maybe some didn't appreciate the fact that I wasn't a big homer. And even though I was a homer, I didn't show it that much. And that's the thing that I think you and I both agree on, is that you can be a homer. Just don't show 100% of that, especially considering the fact that I know that when I'm doing a Paulsboro Audubon game, I have Paulsboro people watching. Like this week, I have ACIT in Triton and Audubon Pennsville. Audubon and Pennsville, this is going to be my first game after graduating from Audubon High School covering Audubon. So now I have to go from being a little bit homer to being completely 50-50. It's kind of like Tom McCarthy about 10 years ago. He did a Fox national game between the Phillies and Diamondbacks, I think it was. And that was the game where I think it was both pitchers homered in the same game. And Cole Hamels hit like a home run in the second inning. And the one thing I remember from that game, that being in 2011, was Tom McCarthy was still the homer, even though it was on national TV. Arizona would hit a home run, and he'd say, and that's a deep fly ball to left field, and that's going to be a home run. And then Cole Hamels goes deep for like the second time in his career, and he's like, and that's a home run for Cole Hamels. Like that was something I noticed big time, was the fact that he went on national television, but the tone didn't change. And that's something that I think that every broadcaster needs to have in their asset. And not anything against McCarthy, of course, he's a great guy and a great commentator, but um, there's something where you kind of have to have a little dial that turns off. Like this Friday, I've got to turn off that dial for Audubon Pennsville. I might root for Audubon up here, but when I'm talking on the microphone, I've got to change things up a little bit.
There's nothing wrong in the broadcast. Hey, this is my first broadcast back as an Audubon student. Obviously, I've got some ties here, but we're going to do our thing. And so, you just do your thing. That's fine. Like I've got ties to Philadelphia. I've got ties to Sterling. Yeah, I'm going to get a little more excited when my team is slightly, but I also want to balance it out. Again, you mentioned Joe Buck. I think he's a fantastic announcer. It's hard, different sports. You've had the experience now of going to different sports. My personal favorite is Al Michaels. I think Al Michaels knows how to raise the tone of his voice. I think he's got a pretty good sense of humor. For a bunch of years, he had to hand off to John Madden. John Madden was the show. You're the straight man. You call the play. John Madden, do your telestrator, do your thing. So he knew his role and he was fine with it. It's sometimes those guys balance in the booth with it. It's just a matter of, again, I think you understand it. My job is I'm there as a play-by-play announcer. I usually work with somebody else. So when I'm play-by-play, I'm telling you, the viewer at home, who's got it, what's the carry. And then the other guy's job is to tell you about the X's and O's. And for me, I try to call the game as evenly as I can, no matter what goes on. And I pride myself on that. But it would be different if my team walks off in a home run, if I'm doing it, or they get a miracle play at the end. I'm going to get excited for either team. It's just hard. It's just something you have to learn. That's why the guys who do national TV, most of them work for a team. The guy, I think it's Joe Smith. He's the Dodgers announcer. But when you listen to him doing baseball games, he carries it the same way through. Unless you knew he was a Dodgers announcer, it doesn't come off in the air. That's why I really like him. So that's one of the things that we have to balance for. And it's just preference. Most Philadelphia fans, though, want to hear the Philadelphia broadcast. They want to hear Kruk do his thing. They want to hear the rah-rah. And then they get upset when a national guy's not doing it and they think you don't want us to win. And that's the biggest difference.
Yeah, and there's a huge difference between being neutral and being biased against somebody. And as you said, I love Joe Smith. He has risen in the ranks in the last couple of years, especially since he slid in after Vin Scully retired in 2016. And he was already a big part of that Dodgers role because Vin Scully in his later years, I mean, he was like 85, I want to say. No, he was 92 when he retired, but even when he was like in his 80s, he stopped traveling to road games for the Dodgers. So anytime, like, he would travel to San Fran and to Anaheim and to Oakland and maybe even to Arizona. But anytime the Dodgers were on the East Coast, somebody else would take over. And that was as early as like the early 2010s, late 2000s. So he was already well familiar in that. But Joe Smith is probably the best example of somebody who can adjust to being both a neutral commentator and also having a little bit of homerism. But switching gears a little bit, um, back to 2005, when you get hired to be a TV teacher at Sterling High. Um, like you said, your degree at Glassboro State was in health and physical education because they didn't have that kind of degree. I mean, I tell people before, if you want to get in sports broadcasting, a communications degree isn't really all that good because it's just broad. Communications degrees are so broad, they don't really help you that much. But either way, um, you had already had so many freelance jobs with cable companies, including Comcast, in the late 90s, early 2000s. What made you want to be a teacher? Like what shifted your opinion there, and was there hesitation to go in that direction?
All right, there's two things. First of all, my dad was a teacher and a coach. My mom was a teacher and coach. My aunts and uncles were teachers and coaches. One of the funny stories I tell, and this is true for me, all my family members were teachers. So up until about sixth grade, I assumed everybody had the summer off. I'm like, wait, your dad works in the summer? I went, whoa. So again, I originally I went there to do communications, as you mentioned. I was denied. So I said, you know what? I'm going to be a health and physical education. And I did driver's ed too. So that was what my degree was in. And then I was able to get the other degree by my experience and taking a test for the technology and communications and teaching it. But yeah, that is where it's kind of got different. Where you nailed it. Communications was such a broad thing. In a lot of cases, that incorporated PR, radio, TV, print me, incorporated everything. So it's neat that my alma mater and where you're involved in now, Rowan, is saying, all right, sports broadcasting, sports media, sports behind the scenes, because yeah, there's jobs there. And and I tell people when it comes down to a job, anything, and this is for you too, um, never accept no for an answer. If you want to do something, never accept no for an answer. I went to Rowan, was denied being a communications major. I, all right, I found another way. I found something I wanted to do. I wanted to be on the radio. People said I had a little bit of a lisp going in it. I got over it. I fixed it. Um, you hear no in everything. Oh, don't wish for the stars. Why not? Somebody's got to do that job, Dan. Somebody's got to do it. For me and some of my friends, it might have taken 10, 15 years of small jobs here or there. A couple of my friends have gone on and worked NFL films. Some have been on ESPN and ESPN radio. But it took time. It wasn't like, hey, I graduate Rowan, all right, hire me ESPN. It doesn't work that way. You work your way up. The advantage you're going to have is you're doing a lot of stuff yourself. What you're doing is great because you're getting experience that wasn't there for me at your age.
It's
You've already announced,
self-made.
or you said it's there, but you've done 100 games. So I'm more likely, if I'm looking for somebody on an air talent or somebody involved with this, hey, this kid, even though he's a freshman right now, not only does he do this, he runs his own show. As a business, I'm more interested in somebody like you because you're living it right now. And that's where I think it's cool that your generation now has this, where the avenues were different, but I'll just keep saying to anybody listening out there, no just isn't an option. Maybe you want to be a DJ, but your voice isn't good enough, or work around. Maybe you work in the scenes. Maybe you become a production person. Just keep going. Don't be afraid to email somebody. Email didn't exist in my day. I had to call. I would call once a week until somebody either gave in or finally took the call. Email makes it a little easier, but keep doing it. No is not an option. If you want to do it and you can hang in there, you'll get an opportunity somewhere.
And that is some excellent words of advice. I'm sure that there are many students, whether they're Sterling students now or Rowan students, wherever they may be, um, definitely some great words of advice for anybody to take in that field. Um, I will say, do you have a favorite part of being a teacher now? Like, does that you've been there for almost 20 years, since '05. Next year will be the 20th year, but considering you've got a long line of history with your family being all teachers and stuff like that. Now you're joining the boat as well. Um, do you have a favorite aspect of it? Especially in your field of TV production.
It's fun in two ways. I became a self-taught director and producer by asking people who were doing it on games that I wasn't announcing. I said, "Look, can I work with the crew?" So I started as cameraman. Then I worked. So I got all aspects of the business. So I would get hired to do camera. I get hired to announce. We want you to do direct. We want you to do sound. So I learned all those aspects. So teaching of it, I have one of the guys, I think you know Ben is one of the guys, Ben Nicholas. Um, Ben is one of the best technical people I've been around in my 20 years of high school. He picked it up right away to the point where when we're setting up equipment, Ben, you got all that over there. You take care of that. I don't even have to worry about it because Ben's taking care of it. That's what Ben wants to do. So Ben's passion is behind the scenes. Guys like Jake, who you've seen, and I have Brian McLaren, I believe is at Ryder now. They're really good in the announcing department. I've helped them, some more, some less, helping them get to where they want. So it's fun for me now to see my former students who get to, whether it be sports. I have one who's a weekend anchor way up in the mountains of New York. It's just good to see kids who came in with no experience to be taught by somebody and molded and guided, and then they go on their way and they get these jobs. So that it's not one specific thing. It's just the fact that I don't have to announce a Sterling game. I can teach other kids. I'll sit in the truck and do the stuff in the truck and work with the crew there. But go ahead, announce. So that's one of the most gratifying things is seeing kids who come in with nothing and just they can take off and make a career out of it.
Something that you're talking about. I don't have to announce the Sterling game. I can teach somebody else to do it. Kind of brings me back to May of this year. So I had a project memorial event in my high school. So basically, what we do every year, we have on Memorial. Basically, the day after we come back from Memorial Day is an event that honors fallen veterans of Audubon and of the surrounding towns like Mount Ephraim and Haddon Heights and Haddonfield, because Audubon has, I think it's three Medal of Honor recipients, and it's a big honor because it's I think they coined the term most patriotic small town in America. But either way, I had a conflict because I had scheduled with Nick Core a baseball game in the first round of South Jersey Group 3 between Highland and Clearview. So I'm thinking, okay, I don't have time to start a 4 o'clock game in Mullica Hill and then drive all the way over to Audubon after the game is over, after your post game interview, pack up all the equipment, and then drive those 30 minutes in rush hour traffic to get back to Audubon because I had to be there at 6 o'clock. That was the report time. I had to go home, change into a nice dress shirt and pants, and do all that. No way I could get the time for that. But my good friend Chris Baker was able to call the game. He said it was the fourth game he had ever commentated for baseball. And my producer, Vincent Vogt, who's a great guy, if he went to Sterling, you would have loved him. But he went to Haddon Heights. He's a freshman at Camden County now. But basically, the situation was I couldn't be in two places at once, and I've got $4,000 or $5,000 in equipment. So I told Chris and Vincent, I said, I'll throw you a couple bucks for doing this game as a favor because I appreciate it, and I stood over them for like an inning to make sure that they were okay and that there were no questions or anything. I gave Chris a couple tips and then I left. And I was listening to the game in the car on the Apple CarPlay, and I'm just blown away by how much how much they could do without me there. And I realized, well, this is Dan Wilkins Broadcasting. This has my name on it, and I have taught Vincent how to be a good producer with no prior broadcast experience because Haddon Heights doesn't have that much of a program. But and Chris, who again went to Gloucester, had some experience there, but he said it was like his third or fourth game that he had ever commentated for baseball, and he did a phenomenal job. It was a 5 inning blowout, don't get me wrong. It was 13-3. Clearview moved on as the 6th seed, but and in theory, I could have packed up all the equipment and made it by like 6:30, but I was so grateful that that weight could be lifted off the shoulders of, oh, I don't have to like be nervous whenever I give somebody else the microphone. If they know what they're doing, obviously, that's one thing. But, Vince, he had been a producer for about a year, maybe about 10 months before I did that. And that kind of lifted the weight off of like, okay, I can do this. If there's a conflict, things can change, and I can switch things around and have different personnel. Like we did that for a football game last week. We were at Gloucester, and Chris did the second and third quarters, and I went on production for the second and third quarters because I wanted to get a better feel of how my producers do it because I teach them certain things. I teach them how to press the buttons, but I never realized how hard it was. So I think that that's always something that we can take as a learning experience is, it's great to commentate the games, but sometimes there's got to be different people for different jobs. Um,
It's
but
interesting
yeah.
that you mentioned that because again, my coming out of college and my first experience with cable TV, I was always an on-air talent. So
Mhm.
I didn't know what was going on in the truck until I started working in the truck and never realized how annoying it is for people in the truck when the announcers ask for, let's get a replay of this. We'll get to it. We have yeah, we want to get you a replay, but you're told right away, don't ask for it. We either have it or we don't. And sometimes I'll tell them, I can talk to you like as you the one of my announcers, I can talk to you in headphones and you can hear me, but the people in TV land can't. So that's one of my things in the truck. I learned right away. Ooh, never ask for a replay in a truck situation because it's not professional. You don't do that.
Right.
So it's interesting that you said it. So it helped me, what I think, become a better announcer by the experience I then gained behind the scenes. So I think it's real important that even though your goal is to be on the air, it's good to take these behind the scenes things that you do, and that's going to help your career a lot.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I tried to shoot for on that Thursday game on the 5th was, I never realized how hard it was. I mean, obviously we're not in a TV truck, but just for me to go in and out of commercial break, and for football, we run a clock on the screen as a part of our graphic. So I have to start and stop the clock every time an incompletion is done, and I have to make sure that what I see on the scoreboard, on the real video board, is also what matches on the broadcast. I mean, usually we allow for like 5 seconds maybe, and we tell the viewers as a preface that the clock isn't always 100% and it's unofficial. I do that for soccer games as well because we run the clock, but there are some facilities that are just grass fields in the middle of La La Land with no running electronics whatsoever. So, that's one thing that I think is important is that, those disclaimers is like, hey, this clock might be off by like 30 seconds. And then, of course, high school soccer runs extra time, which throws everything else for a loop if you don't have the right electronics. Like Delran has a scoreboard. They don't run extra time. When the whistle hits zero, or when the clock hits zero, they blow the whistle. They blow everything dead. We're done and out. But there's some places like Audubon, I should say, their turf has a scoreboard, but nobody's plugged it in like 10 years. So, the officials keep the time on the pitch and they have like 4 or 5 minutes of extra time. And I'm just like, what are we doing here? Like, can we plug in the scoreboard or something?
That's one of my things, even professionally, with the soccer, the cloak of the score and all that. It drives me nuts with that too. So that's one of my things that it makes it pretty difficult. It happened to remind me, like talking announcer truck, I have to prepare commercials and or public service announcements. At Sterling's case, we do public. So we have to cue them up and have them ready. And I have to train the kids because most kids will go, that's the end of the first half. Sterling leads at 14-0. Boom. Now I have to talk them in their ear. 15 seconds. I need some time. 10 seconds. Keep talking. And sometimes we'll mix in a drone shot, or like if you're watching the Eagles game, I might have a shot from something in town. I need you to stretch. So that's one of the things I'll teach you. I happen to think of one of the stories that I found pretty amusing back before the computer days when we're talking about information and score and clock. We're doing a basketball game at Kingsway. And back in that time, there were faxes. There wasn't email. I knew the coach. He was also the football coach. And I said, can you fax me 3 or 4 days before? Can you fax me a roster? So I get the fax at home. I put all the numbers in. I proceed to announce the whole game. Everything's great. We get our players of the game on. The game airs. Then I start getting calls. How dare you? What? How you're unprofessional? I'm like, what's the? I'll call back. What's the problem? You had all the names wrong. You had minority kids as well. I'm like, oh my. I'm like, sorry. I said, let me pull out my sheet. I said, well, here's the sheet the coach gave me. Well, who's your son? So and so, so and so. He's number 14. Well, I go, well, on my list, he's number 20. What? And then I call back the coach, and he's like, oh, I forgot. We got new uniforms, and I
Oh,
forgot to give you the new uniforms. So I announced the whole game. We didn't have one kid right. So I just apologized. I felt horrible about it. But that's where we rely on the information that is presented to us. Maybe it's a little easier now because we have computers. Maybe the information's right. Maybe it's not. How many times have you gone to a certain website, think that numbers are there? The numbers might not be there. Or you go by those numbers. And, oh, we changed this guy's. So I've made it a point to really work now with the athletic directors and the coaches, and then I double check before the game. Like even if you're doing one of my baseball games, I might have I might have a JV number playing in the game. So I'll come out and say to you, hey, Dan, just want to let you know, number 4 is my starter, but I have a number 4. He's got a blue uniform. He'll be coming off the bench because I've been in your job. But in most cases, a coach doesn't know that. And I don't get mad at him, but it's one of those things. We really rely on the information that these great athletic directors are giving to us. Advantage of college is you have sports information directors. They give you your packets of information. You're all cleared. So that's why it's very important for you and I to have great working relationship with the athletic directors, with the coaches, because we rely on them for something as basic as numbers.
yeah.
We rely on them for that. And it's nice when you can talk to them before the game. I will talk with coaches in certain sports. And then if I think there's something like questionable, do you mind if I mention that on the air? Or is that off the record? And sometimes like, oh yeah, I forgot. I'm talking to you as the broadcaster. That's off the record. So in general, though, they know anything that we talk about, we might relay on the game. And even like with injuries, like with high school kids, I might actually know what the injury is, but with HIPAA laws and things like that, we're technically not to. That's why the Flyers running joke is it's a lower leg injury. We all know it's the ankle, but they'll just announce it. So that's kind of what I'll do as an announcer. Like sometimes I flat out know what's going. I might know that this player has a concussion, but we'll say,
But you
hey,
can't say
they
that.
have some kind of injury. So that's the other thing that kind of carries along. So that's the other thing I've learned over the years too. So that's one of those other things. So again, we apologize if we get the number wrong. We apologize if we say the name wrong. Like I might look at a name Smith and say, oh, that's obviously Smith. I don't have to ask about that. But I didn't know that there's some background and they call it Smythe. So somebody might get aggravated. Like I had my coach at Sterling come up to me today, and one of the other coaches said that we were calling the kid's first name wrong. So I went to the list and I go, well, that's the name right here. And he goes, yeah, that's what we call him. The parent wanted another name, but the kid told us this is what I want to be called on the broadcast. So that's something I reached out to the parent and said, look, this is what your child told us. This is what we're given. And they said, all right, we understand. So
Right.
we don't hit a home run every time, Dan. Sometimes
No,
we
and
make a mistake.
and you're not expected to. And that's something that happened with us a couple weeks ago. The same game that I was talking about with Chris Baker, Lower Cape May and Gloucester. Lower Cape May had about 8 players on the roster. We didn't get a roster from their coach. We didn't get a roster from NJ.com. I mean, there was their quarterback, number 8, and there was, I think, a couple receivers. That was it. Nothing on the offensive line, nothing on the secondary, nothing on special teams. So we just had to say, and number 23 on the carry, like we were like that, like they were being blacklisted or something. But and that's not necessarily Lance Bailey's fault. That I give him credit. It's a tough job. Um, but that's what frustrates me sometimes, as a broadcaster, is when you don't have enough information. And, the whole thing about putting stats in NJ.com or reporting the scores to Gridiron NJ or something like that is, accuracy, and also for the benefit of the kids. Some of these guys are going on to college to play, and it's important that they get represented accurately. But I will say, to your point about um kind of keeping things, I guess you could say, keeping things professional and making sure that you don't screw up on anything. I can't guarantee that. Like, I can't guarantee that I'm going to be perfect every time. There's some times where I make a massive screw up and, I say something the wrong way, or even if I'm trying to say something simple and it comes off with the wrong inflection and people are like, why did you say that? We had the Camden Kingsway game from a couple of weeks ago. We did, it was a 30-0 game, and it was 22-0 at the late in the fourth quarter. Camden scores, and then they go for a 2-point conversion and they get it. And the reaction in my head is like, why are they going for 2 points? Like, it's 28-0. You can kick the PAT. You've kicked plenty of PATs successfully tonight. The game is over. There's 4 minutes left. Why are we doing this? And then I get a couple comments because sometimes we do run a live comment feed. Sometimes they run better than others. It's kind of a play at your own risk situation. Like, sometimes when games get really heated, we do shut off the comments. It's kind of like you have a privilege to be commenting live. And we shut them off for a while after a couple of really contentious games. But anyways, um, people were like, "Well, why are you biased against Camden?" And I'm like, "I'm not biased against anybody. Kingsway's not paying me to be here. Camden's not paying me to be here. I'm doing this for the advancement of my own career." And, I was stating my personal observation because I didn't have a color commentator. It was me and a producer who didn't like to commentate. So I was just like, in my opinion, I didn't think they should have gone for 2, but my inflection was a little bit more outlandish, a little bit more expressive, and I didn't mean for it to be that way. I meant for it to be more of, oh, I disagree with this. And the way it came out was, why are they going for 2 points? I don't get it. Like, it was almost like I was doing a John Madden impersonation, basically. And I didn't
But
like it
that can
after the fact.
that that can happen. I had a coach in a football game. He heard the broadcast afterwards, and I didn't think I was over the top critical. I was just like, they had done something completely off the charts. I wish I could remember what it was. It might have been, I don't know, a punt on third down or something like that. And I'm like,
Something
I was on the air. I'm like,
outlandish.
something that you, I just on the air. I'm like, I just don't understand the logic. I was playing the role of color analyst in that game and said, I just don't understand the logic. And they ended up
Mhm.
losing the game because of it. And obviously the coach feels bad, and he eventually confronted me on it, and he and I had a week or two later, we had a heated argument. And I said, I'm not here to tell you what to do or what not to do. That's not my job. But you did something that, in my opinion, was completely off the charts. It led to the loss in your game. I said, I'm not there to pick on you, but at that time, when it happened, not Monday morning quarterback after the game was over, when it was happening, that's when I questioned it. So that that's the only time in my 32 or 33 years of South Jersey that I've gotten into it with the coach. Most people are phenomenal with this. I happen to think of one other football thing. I did one big football game, and as like a mind mess with the other team, let's say the quarterback's number 12, they had the kids switch to number 24 before the game. So all of a sudden, we're announcing the game, and we're like, Dan Wilkins is supposed to be the quarterback, but he's not out here. We have number 24 out here, who is Joe M. All right, Joe M is the quarterback. Nobody tells us. We announced for the first half. Now, luckily, some people in the stands hear it. Halftime, they come up and say, just want to let you know, that is Dan Wilkins. He switched his number. Like, okay, we apologize, folks. And then the other story that quickly comes to mind is I had a soccer playoff game, and we talked about setting up cords and cameras all over the place. I was center field camera, and an hour before the game, umpires looked at it, and it was one of these fences. Unlike, I think, do you have temporary fencing at Audubon, or is it all solid up the fence?
For soccer or for what are
This
we
is
talking about? For what
baseball,
sport?
baseball
Okay,
outfield when you're out.
so for baseball outfield, you've seen it before. So we have permanent fencing from left center field where the scoreboard is to right center field at the end of the track. The left field foul pole to left center and the right field foul pole to right center is temporary fencing. It's one of those weird things where it's like I want to say 65% temporary and
All right.
like a
Well,
decent chunk of it is permanent.
our softball field is all temporary fencing that you can step on
Right.
and go over. The rule is if you catch the ball, hit the fence, and go over, it's a catch. But if you step on it, extend the field, you can't do that. So I have my center field camera, which is unmanned, locked, and I put it where after the fence comes down, we walk 2 or 3 feet and we have the camera there. So even if you run full speed, you're not going to hear it. So we go on the air to start doing the game, and they meet at home plate, and the assistant coach in this playoff game doesn't like my camera in center field. So I don't know what's going on. I'm like, what's the delay? I'm in the truck. The kids are trying to. All of a sudden, I have the kids in my ear that the ump wants to talk to you. So what's going on? So I leave the truck. We're still broadcasting. I put one of my other kids in to do it, and they're like, "You got to move your camera in center field." I go, "Why?" They said this assistant coach doesn't like it there. So I asked the ump. I go, "Are you okay with it?" The ump goes, "Yeah, I'm okay." So I said, "Let's play ball." I walked away, and they well, no, no, no. So I ended up having to call our superintendent in. He got in on it, and we were doing nothing wrong. So that was the other interesting thing that's happened over the years with this. I just that happened to come to mind as we were talking about how things can get a little contentious sometimes.
So what was the end result of that? Was it you ended up like moving the
Well,
camera or
Well, here's what happened. My superintendent decided to be what I would call the nicer person. They asked me to back it up and move it a little more to the right. Like I had it like a Phillies game, right over the pitcher's right arm,
which is
and it was no
what I like
distraction
to do.
at all. It's standard. It's a standard place to put it. We would do it at that point. I'd been doing it for 10 years. So the ump asked, look, with our superintendent, can you move it to like 5, 10 feet? Or I said, all right, just do me a favor. I need you guys to wait because it's going to take me a little bit. So sure enough, don't I go out there, I start doing it, and they're getting ready to throw the first pitch. I hop right over the fence and I run right up to the pitcher, and I'm like, hold on. I got the ump. You made an agreement with me. You guys are waiting. Well, the other coach wants to get going. I'm like, who's running the game? The other coach or the
Yeah,
official
you
here?
guys as officials are in charge. Like you should be the one to have the final say. We made the agreement. Let's do what we agreed to.
And I said, I need a couple minutes now. I'm honoring your request. So I'm running, and my kids get a shot of me running back to the truck as the first pitch is starting to come into the game. So those are one of the few goofy examples. 99% of the time, everyone is very polite. I tell my announcers with the high school games, you can give your opinion of a infraction in football or basketball. Just you know, don't go too crazy on it. Hey, I think that might have been a foul in that situation. Fine. Or I think there may have been a hole. Leave it at that. And that's kind of where I've kind of prided myself with the kids too with that.
Yeah, I mean that is a funny story. I didn't really think about the fact that you'd be in the truck because when we're doing our games, we've had I think one or two instances where they ask us to move, but our standard practice is you've seen it with Sterling Baseball or Haddon Township. In any situation where we're dealing with a temporary fence, we back up 10, 15, maybe even 20 feet back
They're great.
behind where the temporary fence is. Because, like, even that wasn't something where, like, oh, we had to learn the hard way. It was literally the first time, I think it was our first ever baseball game that we did for Audubon was at Sterling. and I think it was your first game as a head coach in 2022. The lefty with long hair, I forget his name, but he threw like 6 innings or whatever. Audubon won that game 4-3. Don't know why I remember that, but I can't remember algebra. But anyways,
That's good. Good deal.
yeah. But anyways, um, I remember even for that game, my producer and I were like, yeah, we should back up just in case deep fly ball comes in. In Audubon, it's less of an issue because even though that is by definition temporary fencing, you do have a thick chain link fence that you can consider to be permanent and somebody can crash into it and it won't just topple over. So either way, I'm getting a little sidetracked. I
Sorry about
wanted to.
that.
No, you're all good. I mean, this is a great conversation, and I've had some great conversations with people over the years on the Dan Wilkins show, but none that I had a pre-existing personal connection with. So there are layers to it.
Cool.
One of the best episodes that we ever had was, I want to say, with what's his name? I keep forgetting it now. Right. So Colby Evans. So he does what's it called? He does a blog where he writes about small market teams in motorsports. So like for the late models and ARCA and NASCAR, he writes about the little guys, and he was a pit crew member for certain teams out in the Midwest because they don't. The smaller guys don't carry a full time roster. They carry guys like if you're. He lives in Kansas. So when they went to Kansas Speedway in Topeka, they were like, "Oh, we need you for this race." That kind of thing. They only needed him for 1 week. They paid him like $200 or whatever, and you were good. And you changed the tires and you filled up the gas tank, whatever. Either way, it was a great conversation, and it was like an hour and 45 minutes long. But I didn't know him before we got to talking, before he went on the stream. So it's great to have this focus with South Jersey, and like next week I don't know who I'm going to email next week about doing another episode, but I know that this is already a good start. I wanted to ask you one of the things that came into my head while I was on my way down to Pittman this afternoon. Um, was something about look, like 10 years ago I remember, like maybe when I was 10 and like 9 or 10, my grandparents' house, we would have I would just channel surf a lot while they were making dinner, and the public access channels would come on, and one of them was channel 19. And today that story's a lot different. Like I remember going and listening to all the jazz music that was on the Cherry Hill Township Network when they were talking about Board of Education meetings, or QBC TV, not QVC, QBC down in Millville. For some
Yes.
reason, we had that. And there's a couple others like Marlton and Medford. They had their own like township or borough-based networks
Now,
that didn't really
do
play
you
much
have?
of
Did
anything.
you have? Did they have Verizon FiOS? That was my question. Because they're the
Yes,
ones
they
that.
did.
All right. That. All right. Where I live, we don't have that. But continue. The
Right.
Verizon FiOS let you see all the channels.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that it, my family has always been Xfinity. We still have Xfinity to this day, and even 10 years ago we did. But my grandparents in Haddon Heights, they had and still have Verizon. But most people are cable cutters now, and that has forced a shift in what it means to operate a public access channel like Channel 19 or the Varsity Sports Network, whatever you want to call it. That objective has changed, and the live streaming now on YouTube, you can now paywall certain streams on your own website. You can have pay-per-view for a high school soccer game between two under 500 teams, which I will never understand that. But because we don't charge. I've never charged anybody to watch my streams. I've charged people so that we can come out and stream the game, but for the actual viewers themselves, that's not even a passing thought. Either way, I wanted to get your take on cable cutting in the past 10 years, and basically just the transition from a TV cable world to the streaming landscape we live in today in the 2020s.
It's funny because I'm 58 years old, Dan. So I'll say right out, I still have cable. I like the convenience of cable. Um, through trade magazines and talking to people, I knew about streaming and I knew about it coming for phones. And I'm sitting there going, I like my big screen TV. Why would anybody pay to have something on your phone? I'm like, that's silly. Well, obviously, I was very wrong. So I missed the boat on that. Everyone wants it now. They want it live. Like what you're doing is fantastic. Get the game out, do it live. Again, more people are going away. It's interesting you get brought up the Varsity Sports Network because in Camden County, in the I guess it was mainly in Haddon Heights, Haddon Township, Audubon, and Haddonfield area. They share a Channel 19 out of municipalities, and for about 10 years, myself and Kevin Schulz did the Varsity Sports Network. COVID ended it. We are now in the process. We're going to be bringing it back. I think we start in another week or so. We're going to start doing a couple games here or there. Now, the difference being, we're doing it on the cable TV
Oh.
solely. It will not be live. We are not. We don't have that technology right now. We don't have the equipment, so we will be doing it. I think he bought some equipment to possibly go live on the cable only. We will still tape it and then we'll put stuff in there later. So we're going to start doing. We usually did 8 to 10 games a season, just kind of like you do. The difference right now is we're not going to be live, and just like you do, we didn't want to charge anybody. So what we've always done is we've gone out and got sponsors. So the
That's what I
sponsors
have
will
as
pay.
well.
Same deal. It's the exact same thing. And when I started in 1990, it's just what you're doing. I had sponsors mainly. I was in Gloucester City. We have businesses who like what you do. They like what I was doing back then. They say, you know what? I like what you're doing, Dan. I'm okay with giving you X amount of dollars. Just support what you do. And just so people know, hey, business X supports Dan and what he does. Hey, if you happen to come in, just say, hey, I saw you on there. The tough thing for you and I is we see McDonald's commercials, you see beer commercials, you see this commercial. We're not used to walking into McDonald's and saying, hey, McDonald's lady, I saw your commercial. You feel kind of silly. So that's part of the stigma that we have to fight as local broadcasters. With we have a sponsor, because you might have this place and the person's waiting for people to come in, and you might hear after 2 or 3 weeks, well, nobody came in and said anything because
Mhm.
people are uncomfortable. I said, all we can tell you, we don't lie. We just say, look, it's local. You're involved with the high school. What's going on here in the high school broadcast? We don't promise you viewers. We're not rated. But people, all I can tell you is people watch the game, and that's all we can do. And I'm sure that's what you're learning as part of what you're doing as well.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna say I was surprised to hear that the Varsity Sports Network is coming back. Is that new information? Is this the first time you're mentioning that to a public audience
In
or?
public, yeah, in public, it's the first time.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm just
we've
letting
been
you know because
working.
this is gonna be on YouTube in the next 24 hours. So if you're working on
Cool.
a press release,
Yeah, we'll have people working behind the scenes behind that door.
you now it's got to be
It's just
accelerated because you let the cat out of the bag, man.
it's just something that again, it's just something that we've done. We did for 10 years. Had it not been for COVID, we probably still would be doing it. But COVID, it was just. I'm not going to. Me and Kevin Schulz to do it. We're not going to go to a business center during COVID and say, "Hey, how about sponsoring? We're going to do this game," when they may not have anybody walking in their business. So
Right.
we personally shut it down as life shut down. But we've reached out to some sponsors we had. We got a number of them back, people that we know, and it's just something. Again, it's not going to be live on YouTube. It will be live. We hope to have it live on cable. Mr. Schulz had to invest in some equipment for the municipality because the equipment they had was not workable. It had all not workable, so he had to go put new stuff in. So yeah, there's going to be some games out there that even though I won't wear my Sterling gear, I'll wear a Varsity Sports Network shirt, and we'll just again, it's just another opportunity for kids to get their game on in one form or another because Dan Wilkins can't be everywhere to everyone.
You know what? You are very right. I cannot be everywhere because I'm here right now, and then I'm in Runnymede Thursday, and I'm in Pennsville on Friday, and I'm in Wilmington, Delaware on Saturday. So that's always a good point. But I'm glad to hear that it's coming back, and I'm glad to hear that it's going to be on cable. Especially because you guys are, as we like to say, you guys are rowing against the stream there, quite literally with the stream, because you guys are still on cable television. But that is great information to hear. Um, and I think one thing that changes a lot of people's opinions about high school coverage is the fact that it's not going to be live. And I think that back in the 90s and even in the 2010s, live journalism and live tweeting wasn't that popular. I'd say it's the last 5 years that people like Tom McGurk, Brian Tortella, Kevin Minnick have gotten out there and taken video of the game. Usually they might post a halftime score and then a final score because Twitter is popular and was popular at the time, but it wasn't used for that purpose because print journalism was still popular to the point where they didn't want to spoil too much. They wanted to give the essential information and then if you want to learn more, read about it in tomorrow's paper. But that's one thing that I think is going to be, just from my opinion, a bit of a not a learning curve, but a bit of an adjustment is if you're covering a game at Washington Township, there might be a reporter there who's going to tweet all the live scores. And then when the replay comes up, the cat might be out of the bag. But I don't think
And
that's much of a concern.
it really wasn't like even, 4 years ago, people knew, if you went to the Haddon Heights football game, which we have, I think, on our schedule, people knew who won the game, but they still wanted to watch it, whether they were there or whether they couldn't make it. So at least they had the opportunity on cable to watch it, which I thought was a nice opportunity. And selfishly, I'm personally excited because at Sterling, I let the kids announce. That's their job. Now
Mhm.
I get to start announcing some games, which was my passion back when I was your age, coming out of high school into college. So I like it because I get to now do my play-by-play. So I'm pretty excited to get back with that too.
And that sounds like a great opportunity. One of the things that I wanted to just not necessarily wrap up with just yet, but one of the thoughts that came into my head as I was preparing for the show was I had a conversation with John Mondelli. You probably know him from
Do I've
Gloucester
worked with
County.
I have worked with John. I've announced for him. I've worked for him and with him. So yeah, I've worked with him for many years.
All over. But yeah, he recently kind of unretired from his position at GCIT to help with the Roadrunner network that I am the student head of for RCSJ. And one of the things that he talked about a kid that came from West Deptford, and he basically said after the first week of classes, he said, I knew this guy was going to go somewhere far. And he ended up working with ESPN, ended up doing video for the Eagles for a long time, and he had a very successful career and is still working at ESPN to this day. My question is, have you ever had a student in your 20 years of teaching, whether they're a current student or a former student, that you only get to know them for a little while, but then you realize that they have the factors to go far? Like um, kind of a satisfaction at first sight of like, oh, this guy is built for this job and he will make it far. Did you ever have that kind of
Well,
example?
one of them you said you were in the car with today. Jake Clark has the ability. I think Jake is an excellent post game and pre game person. I think he's a very good analyst and a very good announcer as well. And the young man he teamed up with that went to Ryder, Brian McClernand, he has it. I mean, Brian could get a job today announcing somewhere. He's that good. And Jake was his sidekick with him as well as play by play. Jake did great. And Jake was great at the pregame and the postgame stuff. And, you interviewed the people. Brian did not want to interview the people. Jake did it fantastically. So, and then Ben's the other guy you work with. Ben, he can make a career for himself behind the scenes. He knows he's into it. I've had certain kids who surprised me who went a little further. I've had some kids who've been creative. And like I was saying, one guy is a weekend news anchor in the mountains of New York State, some at NFL Films. So, yeah, there's certain kids I know they have it in them. And those three people I mentioned who graduated last year, I told them, I can't wait to see where you guys end up in 10 years from now because they have it and they have the desire. A lot of it is talent, but a lot of it is also your desire. And how much, Dan, of a battle are you going to fight? How much are you going to continue to battle on? When you get your first rejection letter for a job, I had tons of in radio. I had tons of in broadcasting. Move on, do the next thing. So, yes, as a teacher and as a coach, you see certain kids. I have a player who, Donovan Casey, who played for me, and he's still in the independent league, but he made it to the dugout for the Washington Nationals. I went to the game. He didn't get in the game, but he got there. And you've been very fortunate. Audubon, you've had some pretty good players in many sports. At Sterling High School, to this day, we started in 1962. We have not had a major league athlete in any of the 4 major sports. Donovan got the closest by sitting in the dugout. So, yes, as a coach, I could see it. And as an adult in broadcasting, yes, I can see these kids. And again, I think what I've seen you, what I've talked with you, if you can get the right situation, yeah, you have it's a lot of it's the drive. A lot of kids give up, Dan. They just give up and they lose the passion. You have it. So I think the sky's the limit. And getting with somebody like John's fantastic. John Mondelli knows the stuff. And I took a call from one of the people with him today trying to figure out some of the live streaming stuff. So I was helping one of the other people up there too. So that's the other thing, you network. All these people you mentioned, there's Stan Ritter's at Kingsway. He worked with that group too. It's just contact. So I hope that answers your question.
And yeah, I mean that's something that has always been a part of my vernacular in talking about broadcasting is um, a lot of people can do the job that I do. A lot of people can show up with a camera and a laptop and a voice and do live streams. But think about it this way. The games that I'm covering, they're not the ones that are going to have the future NFL Hall of Famers. They're going to be the ones that are more about team pride. Triton Regional, they've got a lot of team pride there. Audubon and Pennsville, 2 small towns with great local communities, one of them being my alma mater, that have a lot of pride. And yes, we did produce Joe Flacco and the Laxton father and son combo in the 70s and 90s. But that's not always the end goal. Sometimes, like you said, Sterling opened almost 60 years ago now, 62 years ago, and they haven't had any professional athlete, or as in,
Major
yeah,
league.
major league, as in for professional sports. And sometimes that's just not the goal. Like sometimes, there are schools that are ubiquitous with something. Audubon, I would say, if you asked somebody what sport or what thing Audubon is most associated with, it's baseball. They have 8 state titles. You could say the same with Gloucester Catholic and their 21 state titles. With basketball, you might say Camden or I'm trying to think, but you get what I'm saying. Like there are schools that are ubiquitous for a certain sport. Sterling is ubiquitous for their broadcasting, and you are a large part of that. And I'm glad that you mentioned that about Jake and Ben because they both have DWB experience as well. So I can put that
They're
as a
the
chip
kind
on
of
my
kids,
shoulder.
if you have to do something in Audubon and you give them the stuff, don't
They've
worry, they'll
got it.
get the job.
They've
Yep.
got it. Now, in more recent years, you took the job as the Sterling head baseball coach, which obviously has meant a shift in, kind of the prerogative of what you kind of have to accomplish. It limits your time for the spring. It kind of limits your time in general, just because the responsibilities that are added. But um, you know, were you approached about the job in 2022? Was it you kind of made the first move, and did you have any early? I guess I could say early hesitations about taking the job just because of how much work you already do with Sterling and Channel 19.
Well, one thing I didn't, I guess, put on my resume that I was a volunteer assistant coach my entire time here at Sterling. So at Sterling, we knew what I would do as the assistant coach, a volunteer, is that if there was a big big softball game going on, and we didn't play it the same day, I would take my crew and go broadcast that. So that was a nice little benefit. Like sometimes West Defford, we might have a night baseball game, and the girls might play softball after school. So I could produce a softball game after school at our place, and then hop in the car and meet the team hopefully before the game starts at West Defford. So I was able to manage that. So I had to get with my administration. Um, Coach Hoppin was our coach for the 19 years that I was here, and there was one other coach before him. And he said, "I'm recommending you. You should be the head coach." And I said, "I'd like to do it, but luckily my administration is awesome. I had 19 or 17 or 18 years behind me. They knew who I was and what I would do. I say, when I can, I will have kids do the games." And there's 3 guys we just mentioned, with the exception of Jake, who played baseball for me. The two other guys would go, hey, we're going to go do a soccer game or softball game today. We're going to go do a lacrosse game today. So I would go about doing my business and practice with my team, and they would go out there. So it's almost, if you were one of my students, Dan, it's almost kind of a final exam. They may not take the truck out with them, but they'll do a one camera shoot at a softball game, at a lacrosse game, at the indoor volleyball game that we have. So they get the experience and the pressure of doing it like you do. You feel the pressure of not only just the broadcast. Are we going to be able to hook up to this? Are we going to hook up to the cell phone tower? Are we in a bad spot? I know every time I go to Haddonfield, whether I do wrestling or basketball, I have a terrible time hooking up to the
I
cell
have
phone.
plenty of horror stories of Haddonfield, but go on.
It's the same thing. Like we were doing a wrestling playoff match at Sterling, and we had the hot spot, but we're down in a cement building below the ground. We couldn't connect to anything. I did a basketball playoff game. We're up on the cat's walk. I'm trying to run an antenna out the window, but I find out the side we're on, the company that we do cell phone service with, theirs is on the other side of town and it's not
Oh.
reaching. It's little things like that where, and I've done it. I've gone to Pemberton. We were in Pemberton in the middle of nowhere. We couldn't connect to anything. So we just put something out on Twitter. Hey, we'll have the game for you later. We're going to tape delay it, old school. So
Mhm.
that's part of the pressure that you're used to, that an average college student is not used to. So that's
Right.
something I would like if I was somebody hiring. All right, this guy, Dan, he's got to set it all up. He's got to get the lineups. He's got to be the site manager. He doesn't just show up and put his pretty little face on and put the headphones on and go. So that's what's going to help you. And that's one of the many challenges of doing this. It's not going to happen every time. So, yeah, it's with baseball. I still play men's baseball too. I'm playing at Haddon Heights' field this weekend. Looking forward to that. It was my background, and fortunately, my school was nice enough to say, "Do what you can with the TV stuff. We want you to coach our baseball team." So it's been great for me, and I can't thank the administration enough.
And that's great that they kind of gave you the blessing of being able to coach that program, without having to worry too much about your about the TV background. Because that's what I would have done in that situation. I would have been like, well, I have this, and like, what are they going to do? And then, the fact that they were able to kind of lay down the fears about it and take care of it, is always a great thing. And along with that, you were talking about not being able to connect to somewhere. I should preface what I was saying earlier. The horror stories that I have with Haddonfield are just because bad internet service. Like my mom,
Yeah,
she does pet sitting sometimes. Like we have a family in Haddonfield who goes on a lot of vacations, and they pay her like $50 a night or something, and they ask her, hey, you feed her. Play around with the toys a little bit, whatever. Keep her company for like an hour. Um, and they'll do that every couple of months for like a week at a time. But I know I regret going there because even if she's only there for like 10 minutes just to feed the cat and go, I'm waiting in the car. And what do I have? No cell service. I can't play my music. I can't watch YouTube. I just have to sit and look at the trees for 10 minutes until she's done. And also connecting in Haddonfield, like there's just a lot of issues there. Like, they're an affluent neighborhood. They've got a lot of great places there, but they just don't have a lot of internet service. I don't
and it's
understand why it
and,
is.
and and it's nothing against Haddonfield. It's just for me, it was pretty simple. I'm in a big cement building that signals have trouble getting through, and then I found
Exactly.
out the antennas is away from it. So it's nothing against Haddonfield. It's just that's one of the spots. And I mentioned Pemberton. We're doing a soccer game in the middle of nowhere, and there's no cell phone signal there. So you just deal with it. It's just what you can do. Some people are disappointed for the live broadcast, but hey, we'll come back and we'll show it to you tomorrow. So
Right. And that's what I've had to do a couple of times, not just with Haddonfield, but sometimes with Cherry Hill West, a couple of other locations, especially once you get out into those Pine Barren areas, they're hard to cover.
yeah,
And we do tape delays. We still do our occasional tape delay when we're there, especially when I was doing Audubon games. I wouldn't necessarily travel with the team, but I would pick up my stuff and go cover their road games. And a lot of it was, I knew when I went to Haddonfield might be a long day because I might have to switch out Wi-Fi things, and then I'd just be like, after the fourth or fifth attempt, I'd be like, all right, we're just going to go to tape delay. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to get stressed over it. We're just going to do it, and we're going to upload it later tonight. So moving things along and kind of getting into our twilight questions of the night. Um, I would assume, and maybe I'd be wrong. Would you say that baseball is your favorite sport to cover?
You would be wrong,
I
sir.
would be wrong. Okay, then expand
You
on
would
that
be
because I
wrong.
had that in
Um,
my Google Doc that I had. I was like, I put in parentheses. I think I know the answer, but if then you
all
expand on
right.
it. So tell me your ways. Tell me what you think.
As a play-by-play announcer, being laid back, my play-by-play preference is baseball. I'm made for that. I've done it in minor league. I'm somewhere in between Joe Smith and McCarthy. I'm not a laugher, giggler in the air, but I'm pretty good at making the other guy laugh, and I'm laid back, and I fit very well with baseball. When I did Princeton hockey, too fast, too much for me. I'm not a hockey announcer. Um, Broadcasting in the truck, football is my favorite sport. I personally think football is the ultimate team game. If 10 guys are doing something and one guy isn't, the whole play could go down. I think when whoever designed the game of football, it's perfect because as we look at our screen right now, it's laid out like a football field. It's laid
Hmm.
out left to right. You run a play. I'm fortunate I have 6 and 7 cameras out there. I can replay one. I can replay two, maybe three, and now here comes the next play. It's perfect. I love that. I'll watch football games all day Saturday, all day Sunday. It's made for TV. I love to go to baseball games to watch them. It's relaxed. And I'm sure you figured out too. Baseball is hard to do for TV. It's just hard. The ball moves so fast. There's a lot of downtime. Football is perfect. My second thing, especially at Sterling, right behind it, I love basketball to
Okay.
broadcast in the truck because I have one gym that I work at. It's
Hmm.
my home gym. I can put cameras behind backboards. I got cameras in the roof, and they stay there. It's great. It's not like I'm an ESPN crew, like you're moving all over the place. Well, during the winter, I'm just doing games in Sterling's gym. So when you watch a Sterling broadcast, I'm running some games 12 cameras, and five of them might be unmanned. They're just locked in the position behind backboard. So I like that challenge. But for me, like right now, even though my football team is struggling, I love doing football. The excitement of Friday night, everyone's into it, the band, the cheerleaders, you're outside. So if I could produce, if you're saying to me, Tad, I want you to pick your Fox, ABC, ESPN, what are you going to produce direct? It's going to be football. If you're going to offer me an announcing job, I want baseball.
You
Hope
know,
that
I,
helps.
I I didn't think of an answer being that complex, but I like that. You know, it's for me, like I love commentating baseball. That's far and away what I personally think I'm best at. If I was in a job interview and somebody asked me, you know, what is your greatest strength sports wise, I'd say commentating baseball. And I've never commentated hockey. I've never commentated a nice hockey game. But I also agree with you that it goes a little too fast and it's not made for TV. But I've been to a couple Flyers games. We won tickets last year to a game versus the Capitals or the Blue Jackets rather, and we were like two rows back from the bench. And like it was amazing to watch at the Wells Fargo Center, but I can't sit in front of a TV and watch it. That's the thing I do with baseball. And you might find this funny, but sometimes I have trouble listening back on my own broadcasts. Like for baseball, like I'll tune in just to see like we have a playlist on YouTube called DWB Classics. It is the best games that we've ever done, not just on the production side, but the actual product. I think the most recent one on there was like the baseball game between RV and Gloucester Catholic that had the walk-off error. GC was down 5-1 in the bottom of the seventh, pulls off this incredible comeback, and they win the game on a walk-off error. We had like 400 people watching concurrently, which when I that's one of the biggest things that I have to stop doing is I keep looking at on YouTube the little viewer box that tells you how many people are watching, and it doesn't affect me as much. But when I see a sudden spike, that gets me more riled up, you know. And the benefit of that, the positive does exist that I can say when I see a spike, for those of you joining in the top of the second inning, Clark hit a home run. Um, I can do that. But what I was really bad at when I started out was I kept watching that number like a hawk. When it went down, my energy went down with it. When it went up, my energy went up with it. And it's really unique how it is. I've gotten a lot better with it. And even this past spring, like the RVGC game, we had, I think the number was 385 concurrently, bottom of the seventh inning. Bases are loaded in a 2-run game. And I see that number. I'm like, oh my God, we haven't had that before. Like we hadn't been anywhere close. That shattered our previous record of like 250 for a basketball game in the playoffs. So either way, though, um, baseball is probably my favorite sport to commentate far and away. But I like the fact that your answer kind of has a little bit more layers to it, where um, you have certain sports that you like being in a production truck for that are fun. That are fun to produce and be behind the scenes for, but then baseball and football are good to commentate and are good to be at the center for. Um, so we will close with this question. You have been in broadcasting for a long time, going all the way back to your college years, 1986, with radio DJing, a handful of cable channels for freelance jobs in the 90s. And now, for the past 19, almost 20 years, you have been the head of Sterling's TV program. You've had hundreds of students walk through your doors, and you've had plenty of experiences over these 30 some years. My question for you: what is the one story, your favorite story to tell from your from your career in broadcasting? And that could be from your time as a radio DJ, your time as the Sterling teacher, the time as the Sterling coach, any part of your broadcasting career, your favorite story to tell, whether you've told it already or not, that one of the things I usually tell my guests is something that has the most value, something that you can take out of it, even if it's just a funny story. um, what is the one that you think is your favorite story?
All right. Well, a lot of people that know me on the air, I have some fun. I'm a really fun, goofy guy away from the air. People that know me know that I'm a really fun guy. In fact, my radio career was when Howard Stern was first coming out, and I wanted to be a morning radio host. So I'm gonna give you a radio one from college that I really liked. We had something called a Marty, which back then that was a way to broadcast live. So it was July 4th. It was the summer. There's the Crossings Apartments across just off the campus at Glassboro. Those apartments are still there. We decided that we were going to broadcast all day on July 4th, and we hung a banner out the back, and it faced the back of the proms of the complex. So we're broadcasting live. We had some guys back in the studio that would play the music. We'd communicate by phone, and fortunately or unfortunately, being young people, and we were at that point, we were of legal age. So let's just say we were partaking in beverages at that point. And the broadcast started, I think,
Apple
10 in the
juice, we'll
morning.
say.
Yes, good
Glorified
apple juice. It was glorified apple juice. So we started 10 o'clock in the morning with our first DJ on the air. My show came on from 6 to 10 that night. So by the time I hit the air, I might have had 15 people with me. We were all having a great time all day. So we were really feeling life and having a good time. So one of our friends had worked with I guess, the stage industry, and he had procured pyrotechnics that he could launch off, and he claimed he had a license to do it. So we start promoting on the air while we're talking. Hey, 10 o'clock, stay tuned because we got Gels Philadelphia. Listen to the music and see the fireworks. We're going to light off the biggest fireworks display to music you've ever seen. So every 10 or 15 minutes, we would shoot some things off. And not even thinking about it, people start calling the police. And we're watching it. Once in a while, a police car will come by. We're not thinking our banner's hanging out front. It's nighttime, and we're just not thinking. It's been since 10 o'clock. So we're promoting it. Well, little do we know as we're promoting this that, we're on their radar. So, all right, here we are, 10 o'clock. You ready for the biggest, largest fireworks display that Glassboro's ever seen in music? Here we go. They start the music in the studio. The guy on the ground starts lighting off all these fireworks. All of a sudden, flashlights come out of nowhere. Here comes Glassboro's finest. They grab him. They come up the steps, they knock on the door. Obviously, we open it up. We get taken away. We get put in the back of the car. Luckily, the officer I had with me was pretty funny. We had some characters on the show. He asked who the character was. He had the radio playing our station. We got taken in. We got written up for, I guess it was a noise code violation. The people that were in the studio, this is before cell phones. They know we're not answering. They don't know what's going on. Eventually, we asked for our first call when we got into these back rooms. Can we call the guys at the station to let them know they can go off the air because we're in the Glassboro Police Department right now? So we did that. We got what it was we got a citation. We had to go to court.
Oh boy.
And 2 or 3 weeks later, the group it was about 12 to 14 of us at that point. We had to show up in court, and it was funny because all the police officers who weren't on duty knew the story. So it was lined. All the police officers wanted to see who we were, what we were doing. We paid the fine. We talked with a lot of the officers afterwards.
Can I ask how much the fine was? Like $100,
I
something like
want to
that?
think it. I want to think it was like $80 at that point. It was like a disturbing the peace thing or something like that.
Right.
One of the officers, as the kids were brought in, us kids, was a little rougher on him, not physically, but just like kind of verbally. My guy was like laughing his butt off. He just thought it was the silliest, stupid thing. So we had that was probably that's my most memorable. And we whenever I see one of those guys, we talk about it all the time, and it's pretty cool the way that went down. So that was my overall just to answer that question. That's the first crazy broadcasting that I will never forget. And then we eventually the police actually gave us they had for evidence they had to record it for evidence for the court. So I eventually got a tape that was like going beep, when they record it and they had the beep sound. You could hear the show with the beep sound coming on it, and then all of a sudden here come the fireworks, and we start panicking, and so it was neat. So that was one of my college experience. So there you go. That's a story I'm sure you didn't think
That
you'd hear.
that is amazing. I mean, you were talking about, yeah, I mean that's a Saturday night special right there. Late 80s. People are having a good time. I don't think there's a better way to put that, Like that is
Dumb
that is
college. It was just dumb college kids not thinking, having some fun, and it worked.
exactly. I mean, and that's the thing is that like when somebody tells you and you're in college that they have fireworks, you don't say no because those are fireworks and fireworks are cool. They're awesome. And
Well, in fact, we even went
you
one
wouldn't have
step
said no.
further. Well, we went one step further. He brought him in the house into the condo, and we were dumb enough to say, "Hey, let's see what they look like in the condo." So we
Oh
did
my.
that on the air a little bit too. Dumb college students that were, just being dumb, and one of my life experiences in broadcasting.
That's oh my goodness. Somebody just brings fireworks in and they're just like, "Yeah, let's see what they look like. Let's shoot them
All
off."
right, I'll give you a quick other one. We're broadcasting the morning show live at the crossings. We're
Okay.
around couches. We're talking. I suddenly, for whatever reason, I get sick in the middle of the broadcast and have to throw up. My partner follows the mic into the bathroom. So that's part of the show. I'm throwing up and we're hearing it in the bathroom. Then I start feeling better. About an hour later, we had a sports guy doing sports, and I'll never forget this. He goes, I have my back to the kitchen, and I guess somebody was toasting something. He goes, and that's it for sports. And I'm watching the kitchen get on fire, and there's 3 feet of flame coming out of the toaster. Commotion. We have to grab the toaster, throw it out the back, and throw some
Oh my
hose on.
gosh.
But that was part of at that time. That was the college experience. We were living, you know, at that point, the station's much more adult supervised. There wasn't as much back then, almost 40 years ago now. And I believe it or not, I have all that stuff on tape, and I played it
You're
for people, and
kidding.
it's pretty wild.
That is hilarious. I mean, yeah, I mean it's one thing to have an all access broadcast, but following a mic into the bathroom and then having the kitchen set on fire. That that is hilarious. And
Uh,
that's something I hear all the time from people from like Gen X and early millennials is crazy college stories. I feel like everything's a lot more grounded today. And
Well, again, now let's keep this in mind. There's social media, so if anything off the norm happens, everyone knows. There was
everyone
no
knows.
social media. There was no phones back in my day. So
Hmm.
goofy things happen, and nobody was there to promote it, to show it.
Or
So
to shut
just
it
more
down
goofy.
when they saw something
Yeah,
happen. So
and we
things happen.
you they did. I'm sure they happened as much as they could happen today, but there was nobody with phones. There was no. It just happened, and then it was in our memory. That was it.
Well, Ted, I mean, we have had an excellent conversation here, and this has probably been one of my favorite episodes to
Cool.
record on the Dan Wilkins Show. Thank you so much for coming on because this has been an excellent experience, and obviously, both of us being sports broadcasters have a lot to click about. And hopefully next week, hopefully some people see our interview and they want to get on the show, especially some South Jersey coaches, athletic directors, former athletes, whatever you want to put on there. It has been an honor talking to you, Tad. Thank you very much for joining us, and it has been an honor to talk to you this evening.
Big fan of yours. Enjoy what you're doing. Don't give up. Remember, no's not an option.
No is not an option. That's not just for me, but that's for everybody else listening out there as well. Tad, it's been an honor. Episode 14 of The Dan Wilkins Show. Tune in next week. And also tune in this Thursday and Friday for ACIT and Triton football at 6 o'clock in Runnymede and Audubon, Pennsville at 7 p.m. This video should be up in the next 24 hours. But if it's not, we'll see you on the flip side. Until we meet again, I'm Dan Wilkins. Thank you for tuning in to the reboot and episode number 1 of a new era of The Dan Wilkins Show.